it used to be a tradition in our community where the older would just teach the younger. I mean, it was expected, right? Nowadays, we don't have that. So, you having grown up in the household that you grew up in, which was probably a little different than a lot of the other households around there, what would you say for today, how we can reinstitute that into the Black community?
I think, I was fortunate, right? With the street where I grew up on 133rd on Kinsman. Man, my neighbors were some of the best. They still had that old school mentality. They saw me like doing something. I was just, oh, I'm gonna tell your mom. you know, like they actually cared about forming a relationship with me as their neighbor. They cared about forming a relationship with my parents, when we moved in. And that's one thing our communities are lacking now. People aren't really focused on forming relationships. Everyone is focused on themselves, on trying to better themselves, and we're not looking around anymore. When I was playing, when I came out, even when I was, playing around, in the neighborhood, my parents relied, trusted that our neighbors were on the porch and they were watching us. You know what I mean? Kids these days, we're hearing the sad stories in our neighborhoods with kids getting abducted, and, this and that happening. It points back to that. People aren't the sense of, community has been lost, and that people are now focused on themselves. It's become more about me than we in our communities now. And everyone is focusing on trying to be better than their neighbor instead of trying to be their neighbor's keeper. You know what I mean? And that was what I had, in my household and in my community at the time. My neighbors cared for me and for my family, and my family cared for them and their families. And so I was able to be a kid. I was able to, I was able to actually form, a thought process of community at a very young age. I wish our communities, of course, there are barriers in place that's caused this because, the more people are working now as opposed to back in those, I'm talking about back in those days, like it wasn't just the early 2000s. But, people are working a lot more. The cost of living, the cost of surviving has gone up since, 2002, 2003. Of course, there has to be a response from, people to try and, work more and, to feed their families. But there's still not an excuse for even when, you're coming back from work or, when you have, off days to go outside and actually care about your community. And, people talk about the hood. We want to, leave the hood and this and that. But I tell you, man, growing up in the hood and the community I had was the best thing I've ever had, even after, because I formed relationships with people who cared for me. You know what I mean? When you leave, you talk about leaving the hood and going to the suburbs. When you do leave, and when no one, let me tell you, it's not the same. No one cares about, no one really cares, So it's just my little, my opinions of why I was able to, thrive in that environment.
Man, it's funny. Me and Willie had the same conversation about